Hi everyone, my name is Stanley and I want to welcome you to Spiel mit Stan. Today I will be running through a game that is called Battletech Domination. As always, I won't be teaching the strategy of the game, but the basic gameplay and most of the rules, so you can understand how the game plays and play it for yourself after you watch this run through. So basically, what is Battletech Domination? Battletech Domination is a two-player game that is basically a re-theme of the popular deck builder game Dominion. So if you are already familiar with Dominion, the basic rules of Battletech are very similar, but they add a few new things like attacking and differ a little bit from the original Dominion rules. It's a print-and-play game made by Heise. I will be showing the version 2.2. 2.3 is currently in review, but it's still not finished. Well, what is the goal of the game? Basically, the players will be deploying units to attack the enemy and to defend themselves from the enemy as well. And they will be playing support cards to increase their abilities to play and buy cards. This is very important because at the end of the game, the player with the most cards in his hand plus deck plus discard pile wins the game basically. In contrast to Dominion, there are no victory point cards that you can buy to gain victory points. Instead, your whole deck counts as victory points in the end of the game. The game ends whenever any player has depleted the fourth supply pile, but more on that later, or any player can't play any cards anymore because he just doesn't have anything left in his deck. To acquire this game, it's a print and play game, so you have to print everything for yourself. You can find the templates for the cards on BoardGameGeek, the link will be up here. And with that you can print yourself those cards on maybe Artscow or Printer Studio. I myself printed the around 500 cards on Printer Studio for a total of I think €45, including the shipping, which is quite expensive, but it's a one-time thing, so there is no other possibility to really get high quality cards elsewise. This would be everything for the intro, so as always, have fun watching. Now I have set up a full two-player game according to the recommended beginners setup. Let's do a small component overview. On the left side we have 4 different base supply cards. These cards are the same in every game. Then we have the supply in the middle with 6 support cards and 6 mech cards. I will be showing them later to you. These are randomized usually, but in the beginner setup the cards that are in the supply are predetermined by the setup itself. Each player has a deck. The blue player has his deck and the green player has his deck. I put 2 markers to better identify the players with blue and green. Each deck of the player consists of 7 basic factories and 3 infantry platoon cards. I will show you them later. And each player starts with his hand of 5 random cards from his deck. So in the game there are several different types of cards. First we have resource cards. Those are yellowish and can be used to pay for stuff. We have units, as in this case infantry, as it states down here. Those have a green background. We have unit vehicles, as stated down here. Those are orangish. And we also have unit mechs, which are red. Then we have also support cards. They have a grayish background. There are also support attack cards, which are a special type of support cards. Now let's have a look how to read those cards. For example, this is a basic factory. The name is always up here. It is a resource and it gives you 1 factory basically to build stuff. It also costs 0 factories as stated here. Then all units are basically the same. They have a name, a small picture, maybe an ability, a cost, and an attack and defense value. The support cards only have an ability and a cost, of course also the name. The iconography in the game is pretty simple. There are only 4 different icons. There are the factories and loss tech, which is sometimes needed to buy stuff, and also the attack and defense value icons. As the green player is the start player, the blue player gets an infantry platoon in his deployment zone. Now, a game round plays like this. One player plays after the other, and there are 4 phases each round. First, there's the combat phase. Then we come to the action phase, where you have 2 actions each turn. Then we come to the buy phase and to the cleanup phase. Now, let's start the game turn by turn. The green player begins his turn, and first is the combat phase. The green player has no units in his deployment zone, so he has an attack value of 0. So basically in the first round, nothing happens. Now we come to the action phase. The green player has 2 actions now. He could either deploy a unit or play a support card, but he has only basic factories on his hand, so he can't do any actions. Now we come into the buy phase. The player has to reveal how many resources he wants to spend to buy something from the supply and then get the card from the supply. The green player decides that he wants to spend 3 basic factories to buy a munitions factory. This comes in his discard pile. Now we come into the cleanup phase. The green player has to discard the rest of his hand and also all cards that he used in this round. He then draws 5 new cards, which is the rest of his deck. Now it's turn of the blue player. The blue player has an infantry platoon in his combat zone. It has an attack value of 0 and a defense value of 1. It also has the special ability that he can damage this unit at the start of the combat phase, which means it is discarded then in the discard pile. But if you do, you gain +1 attack. But the blue player decides he doesn't want to damage his unit. For his actions, the blue player decides that he wants to deploy another infantry platoon, which is his first action, and he deploys a 3rd infantry platoon, which is his second action. Now he has no actions left, and we come to the buy phase, and the blue player decides he buys another basic factory, which comes in his discard pile, and the rest of his hand is also discarded, and he draws 5 new cards, which is also the rest of his deck. Now it's the green player's turn again. He starts with the combat phase, but he has no attack at all, and he decides to deploy 2 infantry platoons to basically have a little bit defense at all. And then he can't afford anything in the supply, so he gets a 3 infantry platoon, which goes in his discard pile, and the rest of his cards are also discarded. Now he has to draw 5 new cards, but he doesn't have any left, so his discard pile is shuffled and he draws 5 new cards. Now it's the blue player's turn again. The blue player decides in his combat phase that he damages this infantry platoon. Therefore he gets 1 attack value total. This is discarded in his discard pile. And now he has an attack of 1, which means every time when you attack your opponent and your attack value is greater than 1, then the opponent has to damage a unit. Which unit he chooses himself, but he has to damage a unit. And also, when your attack value is greater than the defense value, the defender has to scrap cards, but we will come to that later, as I think this will most likely happen in this game at least once. The green player decides that he wants to damage this unit, so it gets in his discard pile. The blue player decides that he doesn't want to do any actions, but he wants to buy for 5 basic factories, which gives a total value of 5, a supply route. Now this is discarded. Since he has no cards in his deck left, these cards are also shuffled. And he gets 5 new cards. The green player in his combat phase decides that he doesn't want to damage his infantry platoon, so nothing happens. In his action phase, well, again, he can't do anything sadly because he has no units or supply cards on his hand. But for 6 industries, he decides that he wants to buy an advanced factory, which comes in his discard pile, and also the cards are discarded. He then draws 5 new ones. Now it's the blue player's turn. He decides he also doesn't want to expend any infantry. He decides he wants to buy for 3 munitions factory and discards the rest of his cards. And of course draws 5 new cards. Now the green player decides he doesn't want to damage his infantry platoon in the combat phase, and as actions deploys 2 infantry platoons, since this is all he can do. And for 3 factories, he decides to buy rapid deployment, which is discarded, and the rest is also discarded. Now his deck has to be reshuffled again, and he draws 5 new cards. The blue player again decides not to expand the infantry platoons. As his first action, he plays the supply route. The supply route allows him to gain any card costing up to 4 factories, and he has to put it on top of his deck. And he decides he wants to take a cicada, which he gets on top of his deck. And for his second action, he decides he deploys another infantry platoon. He also decides to buy a free basic factory, which costs 0. Discards the rest of his hand and this card and gets 1, 2. And the deck has to be reshuffled again. 3, 5 cards. The green player in his combat phase decides he doesn't want to attack the blue player because he gets the cicada next round most likely, and he needs all the defense he has. He decides to do as an action rapid deployment. Rapid deployment gives him 1 card and also 2 actions. So he has now a total of 3 actions left, and he draws another card, which is an infantry platoon, and he decides to deploy this. So he has 1 action left, but he really can't do anything with that. So he decides to buy for 4 basic factories a battle armor squad, which comes in his discard. Nothing else is also discarded, and he draws another 5 cards. The blue player decides he also doesn't want to do the expand ability of the infantry platoons, but he now deploys a cicada, which gives him 1 attack strength and 1 defense strength, and also +1 action whenever he deploys this unit, so it doesn't cost him an action, so he still has 2. This is deployed here, and he has now 2 actions left, but he can't do so much, so he decides he wants to play the supply route and also get another munitions factory, which gets on top of his deck. And for 3 factories, he decides to buy an ammo dump. This is discarded, and he receives 5 new cards. The green player again doesn't want to damage an infantry platoon, so he comes to the action phase, but he is unlucky, he has no actions left. He has a lot of money. This is a total of 8 plus 1 lost tech. So he decides he wants to buy a Mad Cat, which costs 7, and a lost tech, which he has. So he gets this mech. These cards are discarded, and his deck has to be reshuffled so he can gain another 5 cards. 5. Now, the blue player in the attack phase has a total attack value of 1 because he has the cicada out. Now, the blue player has a defense value of 4, and because the blue player has an attack value of 1, the green player has to damage 1 card in his deployment zone, and he decides he damages the infantry platoon, which gets in his discard pile. The blue player doesn't want to do any action, but for a total of 6 factories, he decides to also get an advanced factory, which costs exactly 6. These are discarded, and he gets another 5 cards. Now he has only 4, and the rest has to be shuffled. 5. The green player again wants to keep his defense, and he's unlucky, he only has resources on his hand, so he can't do any actions, and he decides to buy for 6 an awesome, which costs exactly 6. The rest is discarded, and he gets another 5 cards. The blue player again attacks with a value of 1. That means the green player has to damage another card, and he decides to damage this infantry platoon. And now, for the action phase, the blue player decides he plays the supply route again, and he wants a rapid deployment, which he gets, and goes on top of his deck. And he also plays another infantry platoon, which are 2 actions in total. And for 4 factories total, he wants to buy a Shrek PPC tank. Everything is discarded, and he gets 5 cards. The green player again doesn't want to attack him because his defense force is getting smaller and smaller, But now the green player is pretty lucky because he bought some good cards. He can play the rapid deployment to get another card and 2 actions. Well, he gets another resource, and he plays the Mad Cat, which has an attack value of 3 and defense of 3, which is pretty high. And when you deploy this unit, the opponent must damage a unit costing 5 or less of your choice. Well, it's a pretty easy choice. He decides that blue player has to damage the Cicada, which is then discarded. And then the action phase is over because he has no actions left. For 5 and the lost tech, he decides to buy a command council. His hand is discarded, and he gets 5 cards, 1 here, the rest has to be shuffled again. 5. Now, the blue player can't really attack the green player anymore because he has no attack value left. The blue player decides to play a rapid deployment, which gives him 1 card and also 2 actions. And he decides for 7 factories and 1 lost tech also to buy a Mad Cat. And he gets another 5 cards. Now, the green player attacks the blue player with a strength of 3. He has a defense of 4, so he has to damage only 1 card, which he does. Now, the green player decides he first plays rapid deployment, so he gains another card. And then he has now 3 actions left. He plays the command council, which gives him 1 card, 1 action, 1 additional buy, and 1 factory. So it's a pretty mighty card. So he has still 3 actions left. He decides to put out the Battle Armor Squad. Well, the special ability of the Battle Armor Squad is whenever this unit is deployed, the opponent must damage a mech. Well, it's too bad, but it's still a defense value. And he plays another infantry platoon. Now he has 2 buys left, and he has a total of 1, 5 plus 1 lost tech. He decides he wants another command council for 5, and he has another buy, and he gets another infantry platoon. Now the rest is discarded, and he again gets 5 new cards. The blue player again can't really attack the green player. He decides to play the ammo dump, which gives him +3 cards. He has no cards left, so his discard pile must be shuffled. Gets 3 cards. Now he plays rapid deployment, which gives him another card and 2 actions, so he still has 2 actions left. He plays the Cicada, which cost him no actions, so he still has 2 actions left. He plays another infantry platoon, so that were all his actions, and now he wants to buy, and he buys for a total of 6 factories an awesome, which costs exactly 6. Everything is discarded, and he gets 5 new cards. Now the green player attacks with a total of 3. The blue player has a defense of total of 5, so nothing happens. So he has still to damage a unit, and the blue player decides that he damages this infantry platoon, which is then discarded. With this hand, the player can only buy something, so the action phase is skipped. And for a total of 6, he decides he wants another advanced factory, which he then gets. And again, 5 cards. This has to be reshuffled. 5. The blue player again attacks with attack value of 1. So the green player decides he wants to damage the Battle Armor Squad. The blue player decided that for a total of 5 plus 1 lost tech, he wants to buy another command council, which costs exactly that. The rest of these cards are discarded. And of course, he also gets his 5 cards. Now, it's the green player's turn. He attacks with a value of 3. He has 4 defense, so again, nothing happens. But the blue player decides he wants to damage this infantry platoon. He has 2 actions, and he decides he wants to play the awesome. He can damage this unit at the start of his combat phase. If he does, he gets +4 attack for this combat phase. And he decides to deploy another infantry platoon. For 3 factories, he wants to buy another rapid deployment, and everything is discarded. He gets 5 new cards. Now, the blue player attacks with a value of 1, and the green player has a total defense of 10, so really nothing will happen in that case. The blue player decides that he wants to, for 1, deploy the Mad Cat, and now the opponent must damage a unit costing 5 or less of his choice. Well, it's too bad. The awesome costs 6, the medkit costs 7, so he has to damage this infantry platoon or something like that. And then he also plays a Shrek PPC tank. There is a vehicle, and whenever a vehicle gets damaged, it gets scrapped, which means it doesn't go into your discard pile, but in the scrap heap, and then it's gone from your deck forever. And he also wants to get another infantry platoon for free. And he gets 5 cards. Now, the green player attacks with a total value of 4, but the blue player now also has a high defense. He has a total defense of 8. So nothing happens, but he has to damage a unit, and the blue player decides he wants to damage this infantry platoon. Now, the green player plays first the command council, so he gets another card. And he decides to play this infantry platoon that he has. And now he has a total of 7 factories and 1 lost tech here. So he decides to spend all of this and get another medkit. And he decides he also wants to buy a basic factory for free, since he has he has 2 buys with the command council. And he gets 5 cards. The blue player again attacks with a total of 5. The green player still has a defense of 10, so he damages this infantry platoon and nothing else happens. The blue player first plays rapid deployment and gets another card. Then he plays another infantry platoon, and then for 3 cards he decides that he wants another rapid deployment. Everything else is discarded, and he gets 5 new cards. The green player attacks with a total value of 4, but the blue player can block this because he has a total defense of 8, so there is no issue with that. But he still has to damage a card, which he does. The green player again plays the command council, which gives him another card, but there are no in his deck, so it has to be reshuffled first. And he gets another card. He plays rapid deployment and gets another card. Well, that is again a total of 7 plus 1 lost tech plus 1 here. He wants to buy another medkit because why not? So he gets this medkit into his discard pile. Everything else is discarded, and he also gets another card through the command council, and he takes an infantry platoon. He also receives 5 cards. Blue attacks with a total of 5, but green has a total of 9 in defense, so he has to damage a unit, which he does. Now, the blue player first plays a command council, and he gets another card. Then he plays another infantry platoon, and for a total of 4 plus 1 of the command council, he gets an Uziel, and he can also get another card for free, and he takes another infantry platoon. Of course, he receives 5 cards. The green player also first plays his command council, so he gets another card. Now he plays his rapid deployment, which gets him another card, and he has still 3 actions left. He plays an infantry platoon, and for 5 factories he decides that he wants a long-term battery, which costs 5. Everything gets discarded. He also gets another card, and he decides he wants another basic factory, gets 5 cards. The blue player attacks again with a attack value of 5, but the green player has still a defense of 9, so nothing happens, but the green player damages this unit. The blue player plays his supply route. He decides he wants to take the battle armor squad and puts it on top of his deck, and he plays another infantry platoon, and for 5 he buys another Uziel. Everything is discarded, and he gains 5 new cards, which have to be reshuffled. 5. Green player attacks with a total of 4. Again, the blue player can hold this off. He has a total defense of 9, so nothing happens besides a unit gets damaged. The green player decides first he wants to deploy the battle armor squad. Now, when he deploys it, the opponent must damage a mech. The blue player decides he wants to damage the cicada. Now, the green player plays another medkit. And whenever he deploys this unit, the opponent must damage a unit costing 5 or less of my choice. So he decides he wants this thing gone. So because this is a vehicle, it gets scrapped instead of in his discard pile. Now let's put the scrap heap aside, and he decides for 5 and a lost tech to buy another command console, which he gets. He also gets 5 new cards, but his deck has to be reshuffled. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the blue player attacks with 3, but the green player has a total value of 12, and the green player decides he wants to damage the battle armor squad. The blue player plays a battle armor squad. Now the green player has to damage a mech, and he decides he wants to damage the awesome. The blue player also plays an awesome, which are his 2 actions. Now for a total of 4, he wants to buy another battle armor squad. The rest is discarded, and he gets 5 new cards. In the green player's turn, he has an attack of 6, but the blue player has stocked up on defense and now has a total of 9. So the blue player has to damage a unit, and he decides that he wants to damage the battle armor squad. The green player first decides he wants to play the command console. He gets another card and still has 2 actions left. He wants to play the long-term battery. What does it do? You discard a card. Whenever you discard a resource or support card, the opponent must discard 2 cards from his hand. I discard a unit card, the opponent must damage a unit. Now he plays this card and discards an infantry platoon. Now the blue player has to damage a unit, and he decides to damage this infantry platoon. And for a total of 3, 2 plus 1 for the command console, he decides to buy the rapid deployment, which empties the first supply pile. When 3 others are emptied, the game is over. Now these cards are discarded, and he wants to get another free infantry platoon since he has the command console. Now he gets 5 new cards. The blue player attacks with a total value of 4. The green player has a defense of 8, so that's no big issue. And the infantry platoon gets damaged, and nothing else happens. Now the blue player plays the supply route and gets another battle armor squad on top of his deck. And for a total of 4, he wants to buy the last battle armor squad and gets it in his discard pile. The rest discarded, and he gets another 5 cards. The green player attacks with a total of 6, but the blue player has a total of 7 in defense, so he has to damage a unit. He damages this infantry platoon. First, the green player plays his rapid deployment, which gains him another card and 2 actions. Well, he got another rapid deployment, which he also plays, so he has now a total of 4 actions and gets another card. And, well, he only has infantry platoons, so he plays both of these. And for 3 factories, he decides he wants to get an ammo dump. Everything is discarded, and he gets 5 new cards. The blue player again attacks with a total of 4 against 9, so the green player damages one of his units. Now the blue player first plays a command console, which gains him another card and another action. Then he plays rapid deployment, which gets him another card and 2 actions. So he has now 3 actions, and he decides he wants to play an Uziel and he wants to play a battle armor squad. Now the green player has to damage a mech. Well, green player is pretty angry. He has to damage one of his medcats. He also decides to put an infantry platoon in play, and now he gets 2 buys with a total of 2 money. Well, he can't buy anything from the supply, so he gets 2 free cards, and he wants to get another infantry platoon and another basic factory. The rest is discarded, and he gets 5 cards. Now the green player attacks with a total of 3, but the blue player has more than enough to manage this, so the blue player damages his battle armor squad, and the green player decides he wants to place another infantry platoon, since it's essential because the blue player has much more attack than he defends, so he has to pay attention to that, and he decides to buy the last medcat, which makes this the 3rd pile. This is empty. Whoever buys the command console ends this game. Well, and he gets another 5 cards. The blue player has a total attack of 6. The green player has a total defense of 6. The blue player decides that he wants to use the ability of the awesome, which is overheat. he damages this unit and he gets +4 attack, so he has a total of 5 for this one, and another 5 here. That makes a total of 10 damage. This card is discarded since he damaged it to get the bonus. So he has a total attack of 10, and the green player has a total defense of 6. That makes a difference of 4. And now the green player has to scrap up to 3 cards total. For 1 point overrun, he has to scrap 1, for 2, 2, for 3, 3, but he doesn't have to scrap more than 3 cards. And he can decide where he wants to scrap these cards for. The green player can decide whether he wants to scrap from his hand, from his deployment zone, or from his deck, the first card unseen. The green player decides that he wants to scrap these 2 cards from his hand, so he is left with 3 cards, and this infantry platoon from his deployment zone. So he has scrapped now 3 cards. The blue player plays another Uzil and another infantry platoon as his actions. For a total of 4, he buys another Cicada. And gets, of course, 5 new cards, which have to be reshuffled. 4, 5. The green player first attacks with 3, but the blue player has more than enough defense, and 1 card is getting damaged. Now, the green player decides he wants to play a command council, which gives him another card, but his deck is empty. So he gets another card. Now he plays another command council, so he gets another card. And he plays another Mad Cat. So the blue player has to damage 1 unit costing 5 or less of his choice. And the green player decides that he wants to have this usual damaged. And now he has a total of 4 factories, and he wants to buy another Cicada. And he has 2 buys through the command council, so he gets another 2 infantry platoons, because more cards in his deck are always better. And of course, he gets 5 new cards. Now, the blue player attacks with a total of 5, but the green player has a defense of 8, so nothing happens. The blue player decides he wants to play the rapid deployment, which gives him another card and 2 actions, and he decides that he wants to play this Cicada, and for 3 he buys another ammo dump. Rest of his cards is discarded, and he gets another 5 cards. Now it's the green player's turn again. The blue player has a total of 7 defense, and the green player has a total of 6 attack, so he has to damage a unit, which he does. The green player decides that first he wants to play rapid deployment, so he gets another card and 2 actions. And technically he has his Mad Cat, this Mad Cat, but he doesn't want to play him because every card in the deployment zone is not counted towards points of the game, and he has enough money to buy the last command council, and he decides that he wants to do so, which would trigger the end of the game. So he pays 5 and 1 loss tag and gets the last command council, which gets in his discard pile. The rest of the cards are discarded, and this now triggered the end of the game. Now for end game scoring. All cards that the players have in their deck, in their discard pile, and in their hand, well, he has nothing anymore, are counted towards the points. So every card counts as 1 point. Let's see. Green player has a total of 30 points in his deck, and the blue player has a total of 31. So that makes the blue player the overall winner. Let's talk about the differences from the beginner's game to the real game. Well, basically the gameplay is the same, but as you can already guess, you choose from a little bit more cards. And this works like this. There are 30 different mechs, 5 different vehicles, and 4 different type of infantry, including the basic infantry platoon. Well, those 4 cards, I have to say, are the same in every game. So the basic, the munitions, and the advanced factory, and the infantry platoon always come in play. And you have also a total of 38 different support cards, which are also randomly chosen. So there are the normal support cards, there are support attack cards, there are 3 different additional type of resources, and 4 reaction cards. We didn't have either of those in the game, but I will explain some cards later on. So as you can see, there is a myriad of mechs and support cards to choose from, and this will make every play quite unique. Let's take a look at some of the more interesting cards. Here I have a small selection of units. For example, we have here the Firefly. He has the special ability that he's a raider. So whenever your for combat phase starts, the opponent reveals and discards the top card of his deck. Whenever the opponent reveals a resource card this way, you gain another card. So the opponent has to discard one from his deck, and you also get a card. Here we have the Firestarter. Whenever you deploy this unit, all enemy infantry platoons in his deployment zone will be damaged, which is pretty cool to decimate the defense of the enemy. We have here an Atlas. Well, as you can imagine, if you guys know something about Battletech, this is one of the heaviest units in the game, and it also has the ability Heavy Armor. So whenever you damage this unit, you place it on top of your draw deck, and then you get it next round again in your hand, so you can play it again. So this is pretty heavy, especially it's pretty strong on the attack and doesn't have all too bad defense too. Then we have a Loki, or also known as Hellbringer. His special ability is that he gets 1 defense per mech in your deployment zone, which is heavy. If you have 5 or mechs, for example, this unit has done 7 defense, so that's a very good mech to build up a strong defense, especially combined with other maybe cheap mechs, but it's also very expensive. Here we have a Hunchback. Once per turn in the action phase, I can reveal the top of my deck, and when it's a resource card, the opponent must damage a mech. And when it's a support card, you damage this unit, and when it's a unit card, nothing happens. We have here an infantry unit, the Special Ops team. Whenever you deploy this unit, the opponent must damage a unit of your choice. Then we have here the Vulture and LRM Carrier. Why am I showing them together? Well, because they have the same ability basically. The Vulture has the ability that he got the LRM 20s, so he gets +1 attack per mech in your deployment zone, not including units with the LRM 20s ability. Well, if you have 5 mechs and you get per mech +1 attack, there are already 4 additional attacks, so a total of 6 for 1 Vulture. And yeah, the LRM Carrier is very the same. It's pretty cheap compared to the Vulture, but it also gives +1 attack per mech in your deployment zone. Last but not least, we have here the Medcat Mark II. It is a champion mech. Well, as you can see, it has a very high offense and defense. It costs much. I think it's the most expensive unit in the whole game, with 9 factories and 1 lost tech. Whenever you want to play this unit, you need to have fewer mechs in your deployment zone than your opponent. So if you're already heavy on assault, you really can't play this card, so you need to somehow get your mechs out of your deployment zone to play this one. But this mech is very good to retaliate if an enemy has way more attack than you have usually. And again, I have here 8 different cards from the supply that goes to the support cards, and I want to show you some of them. The Black Market gives you 2 factories when you play it, and you get 1 buy. But when you play this, your opponent names a card and you cannot buy that card this turn. Then we have the Master Spy. The opponent reveals the top 2 cards of his deck. You can choose one of this card and gain a copy of it, and you scrap the other card. This is heavy. This is really heavy. You choose the one of the top 2 of his cards, and you get a copy of it, and you scrap the other card. Well, it's expensive, but it's a very good support attack card. Then we have the Lost Tech Cache. It gives you +3 cards whenever you play this, and you gain a support or resource card that costs 6 industry or less. Then we have here, for example, the Stolen Technology. You can scrap a resource card from your hand, and you gain a resource card that costs up to 3 more. So basically, you can turn your basics factories into munitions factories, and the munitions factories into advanced factories. Here we have the All-Out Assault. It works that way. You discard your hand, and if you discard any cards, you draw no cards on the cleanup phase, but you can do an extra turn. That means that you attack again, but you can't take more than 2 consecutive turns. Now, this is a reaction card. It's blue. It's called Headshot. You can reveal this card whenever your opponent damages a mech, and when you do, your opponent must scrap the damaged mech, so it gets out of play immediately. Here we have Espionage. Your opponent reveals and discards the top 2 cards of his deck, and for each card that he reveals, you gain, when it's a support card, 2 actions, when it's a resource card, 1 buy, and if it's a unit card, plus 2 cards. Last but not least, we have the Trial of Possession. Well, it's also a support attack card, and you choose a mech in your deployment zone, and then your opponent may choose a mech in his deployment zone and damage it. If he doesn't, you gain a card from the supply without paying its cost. So you gain everything. Maybe you could get a Medcat MK2 or whatever. And additionally, if the mech your opponent damaged has an attack value greater than the mech you chose, damage the mech you chose. Well, of course, it's a Trial of Possession, and so both mechs get damaged. Additionally, I wanted to say that whenever a player runs out of cards because he gets overrun too much, the game is also over. So this may happen if a player really gets stomped by the other player, which also may happen, but didn't this time. So this is also a way to win the game. And now let's go to my final thoughts. First, I'll start again with the bad thing in this game. This luck element is somewhat prevalent, but this is an every deck builder game, so it's not too much of a big deal, since in the end you also build your own deck. But as I said, there is some luck in the draw, and if you really don't get the cards that you need, well, then you have also bad luck in that way. Another point is understanding the real value of some cards really takes a while. This is also a game that really gets better with experience, since you more and more understand the value of the cards after each play. For example, beginners tend to underestimate the buy actions because it really gives you more cards to play with, and even if you get rather crappy cards like infantry platoons or basic factories, you still get more cards, and with that you will most likely have more cards than your enemy at the end of the game. Also, what's quite bad or what's really difficult about the game, once you start to get really overrun, when the enemy has 3 or 4 medkits maybe or something similar in his deployment zone, and you get overrun round after round, it's really difficult to get back up on your feet, because if you have to scrap cards every round, then you just don't have enough cards to play with, and it's difficult to gain more cards then. But it's a valid strategy, of course. It's really difficult if you get overrun too much. Also, when one player really starts a big combo with 4 or 5 support cards, or maybe even more, depending on how much he draws, and then has to reshuffle his deck maybe even twice a turn, it really can drag somewhat, because there is really much shuffling in this game. This is also a point I don't really like, but you can't help it. It's a deck builder. You have to shuffle now and then, but I'm not a very big fan of shuffling, so that's a negative for me. And now for the good things. First of all, I think it's a nice thematic experience. Well, I may be a bit biased here because I'm a big Battletech fan, but I think it's really a nice and more or less fitting theme, and the cards more or less make sense thematically. Another great thing about the game is the basically endless replayability. Well, you have so many cards, you have more than 40 different resources and 40 different units. So the combinations will be different every single time you play, and with that, with the combinations of different cards every time, you can also get different combinations to play every time. Like some cards harmonize better with others, and some really play into each other, and it makes sense to buy them and play them in that way, for example, and you get really many strategies with that. In general, it's also quite fast to play. A round with experienced players takes maybe 30 to 40 minutes. The cards are also quite balanced. There are no really overpowered cards. Scott really has done a great job designing all those cards. And again, with the different combinations of the cards, every game will be different. Now, this would be basically everything from me. I have one additional thing to add. If you want to try out Battletech Domination, there is a Vassal module available where you can play. The link should be up here by now. And with the Vassal module, well, there aren't too many players, but if you want to play with a friend or so, you can download Vassal and the module, and with that you can try it out for yourself without having to print the game. I really hope that you enjoyed this run through. Until next time, and goodbye.